Hello, my name is Beverly Skipper and I'm president of SOS Skills of Studying Incorporated and Teen Topics. You've made a good choice in deciding to watch this tape. It's going to help all of you who hate to study, and I don't know anyone who really enjoys it. I studied a lot when I was in school, too much in fact. I wish I had had the tips and secrets you're about to learn from this tape. I promise they'll make your life easier and your report cards better. I don't have to tell you that everything about studying in school is not entertaining. In fact, some of it's very boring. And unfortunately, you have to learn some things that don't look like they'll be of much use to you. I'm not here to make judgments on what you have to learn. I'm just going to make it easier for you to do it. Remember back in elementary school when you learned your multiplication tables? You didn't learn those just by looking at them only one time. You learned them by repeating them over and over until you had them memorized. Learning the tips for studying and turning them into your own personal habits is exactly the same way. You need to see the material more than once for it to soak in. For the very best results, you're going to need to watch this tape several times. The tape and the workbook that came with it are divided into sections. I'll lead you through the different sections, and then I'll tell you to work on that section for about a week before you watch the next part. This way, you won't get overloaded with information. After you've been through the whole tape, wait about a month and then just play the tape from beginning to end. This will keep the ideas fresh in your mind, and you'll probably see some things you didn't notice the first time. If you've rented this tape, it would be a good idea to buy your own copy to keep for reference. I highly recommend that you also have your own copy of Teen Topics Volume 1, which is called Getting Your Act Together. It teaches you how to deal with procrastination, time management, organization, remembering names, following directions, goal setting, and listening. And I'm sure you could tell that those topics would be good for you to work on too. If these two tapes aren't available in your video store, you can write directly to our company. Our address will be at the end of the tape. Well, I've promised you a lot, so let's get started. Our first topic on page 1 is taking notes from lectures. Some of you like lectures better than reading from the book because you can ask questions if you don't understand something. Also, it could be a lot more interesting to listen to a motivating speaker who really likes his subject than it is to try to dig the information out of the book on your own. The great thing about taking notes from lectures is that you can count on seeing just about everything the lecturer says on your test later on. Approximately 80 to 90% of test questions are taken straight from the lectures, so make sure you learn to take some good lecture notes. The points I'm going to go over are on page 1 of your workbook. The first thing to know about taking lecture notes is that you need to be ready to take the notes. You don't have to make a big deal out of it. Just get to class in time to get settled, which you can do while you're talking to your friends. You can be talking at the same time you're getting your paper and pen out, along with any homework you have to turn in. You need plenty of paper and pens and pencils that work. You know how it is when you're all ready and your pen doesn't work, so have a few spares. And please try not to borrow. You can make such a pest out of yourself that people don't want to have anything to do with you. Lots of students like to have these zipper bags to carry small supplies. They seem to work pretty well. I like for you to have just one notebook with all of your classes in it behind different dividers. It helps you get to class with what you need, and you don't have to think much when you're at your locker. You might also like to put numbers on your book covers for the same reason. You've probably sat down in your math class, opened your book, and found out you'd brought your English book by mistake because they're so similar in size. The numbers really help. So the first thing about taking notes from lectures is that you need to be prepared to take the notes. Just for fun now, and to get the idea across to you that you can be ready for class and still talk to your friends, here's a group of high school students arriving for class. Christian is on time, prepared, and very interested in being ready when class begins, but he carries it too far. He won't even talk to his friends. The two girls are able to socialize and get ready for class at the same time. And then there's Dusty. Does this remind you of someone you know?
Hey, Christian, you've read this book, haven't you? What's it about?
Christian, what time is it? Christian?
Okay, maybe you're right, Pauline. I can't help it. No. Why? No. You You're so obnoxious. I
know.
hate you for this. You realize he's cute, Tommy.
Amy, I talked to him last night for a long time, and he's really nice.
No, Amy,
Please,
I'm
he
sorry.
called me up. Hey, call him, please. Just his
Amy,
phone
you don't-
number, please.
You don't know what he's like.
Colleen. I know what he's like. I met him. You met him when? I met him last weekend. Where? At the party. Oh,
Hi, Dusty. Late again. Dusty, we're taking notes. You need a paper and a pen, please. Okay, number one. Well, really, before I start this, we read 6 short stories in the last couple of weeks, and all these things apply to those 6 short stories. So when I'm going through these, think about them. Number one, author and title. Does the title of the story give any clue to its theme?
What are we going over?
That blue worksheet I gave you on Friday, and it looks like this. It says analysis of a short story. Or awaken interest in reading it. Is the story named for a character? And some of the ones we read were the setting, a chief incident, or an important object. Okay, support your answer with reference to the story. And that's about each of those 6 stories. You're going to do this.
I don't have that paper.
Okay, I gave it to you on Friday. If you can't find it, why don't you just get out some paper and pen and take some notes. Number 2, type of story. Is the story classified as a primarily about theme, character, action, setting, or
Amy,
mood?
can I borrow a pen, please?
So there are 5 things there, and I need you to explain that.
Well, I'd really like a pen.
Dusty, what's the matter?
Mike.
Oh, I'm just borrowing a pencil from
Okay.
Amy.
Number 3, characters.
There.
In the short story, there's
What was the first one?
Dusty. I'm sorry, I don't mean to embarrass you, but I have to tell you this. If you would get here a little bit earlier and have your, look at that notebook, that's awful. If you could get that organized and have your things, those people around you don't want to loan things to you all the time. Have paper and pencil and don't bother them. I'm not trying to embarrass you, I'm trying to help you. Do you think you could work on those things, please? Dusty made a real pest out of himself. He didn't get to class on time, didn't have his worksheet, and had to borrow supplies from his friends. Neither his teacher nor his friends are very happy with him right now, and he hasn't done himself any good by missing the beginning of the lecture. So you can see why it's important to be prepared to take notes. The second thing to consider about taking notes is your handwriting. Before you even start writing your notes, make a promise to yourself to make your handwriting as neat as possible and as readable as you can, so you won't have to spend a lot of time rewriting your notes later on. Also, if you use a standard way to title and date your notes every time, it'll make it a lot easier on you. Put the chapter number and title on the top line and the page number the chapter begins on. The date should go in the upper right corner, along with B if you're taking notes from a book, or L if they're from a lecture. The unit title goes in the upper left corner. A good trick for taking notes is to leave both of your margins blank. While you're taking the notes in class, you can use one margin for writing questions to yourself when the instructor wasn't clear or you were daydreaming. When you get ready to study for the test, use the other margin for making up test questions over the information right beside it. Then you can fold back that side that has the test questions on it, and you have a practice test all ready to take. One thing you'll notice as you go along taking notes is that your teachers give you little clues about what's important and what you should be writing down in your notes. Some of these clues are listed in your workbook on page 2. Anytime you hear these key words, write down the information they're giving you. Listen for the teacher to say, the most important, a major development, the basic concept, on the other hand, in summary, remember that, and another thing. Teachers have all kinds of clues for you. You just need to know what to listen for. If they spell a word, make sure you write it down. If they repeat something or write it on the board or the overhead projector, you're sure to see it again on a test, so write it down too. Sometimes they ask if everyone understands. Sometimes they just flat tell you that it's going to be on your test. And sometimes they give you what we call mnemonic devices to help you remember. We'll get into mnemonic devices more when we talk about memorizing. But for right now, I'll just tell you that they are little word tricks, like when you learned I before E except after C. Go back and look over page 2 at all the clues teachers use so you'll be ready to listen for them next time you have a lecture. Teachers also give you hints that you need to write down lists of things. They might say, there are 3 steps to processing film. so you would know to immediately make a list like this. Then listen for them to say the words first, second, and third so you can fill in your list. Don't try to write down every single word. You probably know not to write down all the filler words, in, the, for, but, and so on, but also learn to use abbreviations to make your writing go faster. You can use some of the ones we've listed on page 3, and you can make up some of your own too. Turn to page 3 and take a minute to fill in what you think each of those abbreviations could mean. Then start the tape again to check your answers. Let's go ahead and try a practice lecture now. Take one sheet of your paper and prepare it just like you would at the beginning of a class. You need the date in the upper right-hand corner and an L because we're taking notes from a lecture. Remember that when you hear the chapter title, it goes on the top line along with the chapter number and the page number. And the unit title goes in the upper left corner. All right, I'm going to be your teacher in a class giving you a lecture, so let's give it a try. Remember to listen for clues, not to write down everything I say, leave both of those margins blank, and use abbreviations. We're going to take some notes today on Chapter 9, which is titled, How to Succeed at Your First Job. The chapter starts on page 54, so you might want to open your book and follow along. I'll give you just a few seconds to get your paper ready. This chapter is a continuation of our unit on career planning. There are probably hundreds of points that would help someone to be a success at his first job, but we're going to go over only 8 points today. You should keep in mind that these 8 points will be good for you in your first job and also each and every job you have during your life. The first thing that will impress your employer is for you to always be on time. If you're supposed to be at work at 8 a.m., that doesn't mean walking in the door at 8. It means arriving 5 to 10 minutes early so you can be ready to start at 8. The second way to be successful in your first job is to get a notebook with some dividers and write down all instructions you're given. If you're going to be working on computers, typewriters, and with other equipment that's new to you, and you feel that you're going to have a lot to write, get a big notebook. If you're going to be working in a fast food restaurant, running a cash register, or maybe closing up at night, a smaller notebook might work better. The important thing to remember is to write the instructions down. You'll be able to become independent from your supervisor faster because you'll be able to look in your notebook instead of bothering him for every little thing. This probably seems obvious, but smile. It shows your customers that they're welcome and appreciated, and after all, if you don't have customers, you don't get a paycheck. If you don't meet customers face-to-face, but you talk to them on the phone instead, make sure your voice smiles. Your smile shows that you have a happy, confident personality, and after all, nobody wants to be around a sourpuss. Ask for feedback. Even if you feel that you're doing well, ask your employer, am I meeting your expectations? How can I do better? You need to learn to accept criticism graciously. Don't let it damage your ego and self-confidence. Just because your employer has criticized you doesn't mean that you're a bad person. He's taking the time to try to improve your performance and your value to the company. It may even be very difficult for your employer to give criticism, so make an appropriate response such as okay or thank you. Then make every effort to fix what's wrong. Give your ideas. Your employer isn't paying for a warm body. He's paying for your brain. You're going to have ideas that will save time and money. Make your employer aware of them. Some of the saved money can end up in your pocket in the way of a raise, and your employer will gain respect for you. Follow through. When your boss asks you to do something, do it immediately so he can get it off his list. Let him know it's been completed. Be accurate. Whatever you're assigned to do, do it right. Mistakes and having to do jobs over are costly. Before beginning any project, take a few minutes to think it over, plan it, and decide the most efficient way to handle it. Check your work. Find and correct your mistakes before someone else does. That's the end of the lecture, so take a minute now to check your list against the one on the screen. It isn't always easy to understand the points the lecturer is trying to make, and sometimes you get bored and distracted during lectures. You've probably had a teacher who speaks in a monotone voice, or for some reason you can't stand the lecturer's personality or appearance, and sometimes you can't stand the subject. Sometimes the teacher uses an idea or a term you don't understand, and then he doesn't explain it. You get frustrated and quit listening. Another thing that makes you get bored and distracted in class is skipping breakfast. Your body is deprived and you can't think as well. And sometimes you can't listen in class because you're preoccupied with problems you're having or other things that are on your mind, like your date tonight or a game you're playing in or your weekend plans. The thing to remember is that you can take control over some of the things that distract you, and you can do something about them. Look in your workbook on page 3, number 9, check your comfort level. And you'll see a list of some other things that can interfere with your ability to listen to a lecture by making you uncomfortable. If your fingernails are too long or ragged, that can be distracting. You've probably sat in class with jeans that were too tight, so you know that can be uncomfortable. Girls can be uncomfortable if their skirts are too short. If you're too hot or too cold, that makes it hard to listen to the lecture. We've probably all sat next to someone who bothered us and interfered with our concentration. And you know how hard it is to listen when you haven't had enough sleep. Look at that list of distracting things on page 3 and think about what you could do about each one. Then take control of the distractions and you'll be able to listen better. Okay, you're in class and you're bored stiff. You notice that you aren't really concentrating and you're missing what's going to be on your test. Some other things you can do to keep concentrating are listed on page 4 beside number 10. Take action when your concentration wanders. First, use your imagination more and you can put together a mental picture of what your teacher is saying. This will work pretty well in history classes and literature classes. Second, stay focused on the simple facts that are being presented. Lots of times the facts will make you wander off mentally thinking about other related thoughts. If you wander off, you're going to miss the next set of facts. Save those deep thoughts for later. Third, practice listening. Listening is a skill and you can learn to do it better. If you need some listening guides, you'll find an excellent section in Teen Topics Videotape Volume 1, or you can find books about listening in the library or bookstore. And finally, remain conscious of concentration. When you find yourself daydreaming, take your pencil and write yourself a one-word note in the margin of your notes and get right back to listening. That way you can get it off your mind and you'll still remember it later on. Here's a student of mine who had some problems with concentrating in class, and here's what we came up with. You'll find a written list of these points in your workbook on pages 4 and 5. Okay, what was it, Chuck?
I need help.
Okay.
I'm going to fail trig.
No.
Yes. I can't study in the class, I can't think in the class, I can't stay awake in the class.
Oh,
and I know you teach that skills.
Right, study skills.
Study skills. Do you think you can give me a little tutoring on it,
Yeah.
how to study or how
I've got this
I
book.
just need to stay awake.
Okay, there's a handout in here. You can take this with you. These are what we call anti-boredom secrets. Since you're having problems staying awake, maybe this will help a little bit. First one is to sit on the edge of your chair. If you're sitting back kind of like you are right now, okay, what you want to do is try to make yourself a little bit uncomfortable so you can't fall asleep. So sit up on the edge of your chair.
Yeah, that is uncomfortable.
It is. It'll make you stay awake. Okay, the next one is chew gum if they let you. Now, does the teacher let you chew gum in that class?
Yeah, Mr. Phillips lets me
Okay,
chew gum.
that'll help. And then another one is to make eye contact with the teacher. Do you look at Mr. Phillips during the class? Look him in the eye.
Not usually, I'm usually asleep.
Okay, open the eyes. You'll be sitting on the edge of your chair and it'll be hard to fall asleep. Make eye contact with him. And what happens is he'll start looking at you, and it's hard to fall asleep when somebody's looking at you.
And I'll listen if I'm looking at him.
Right. Okay. Another point in here is to follow the teacher's lecture with your book.
Bring my book to class.
Good. You have to have the book in class. And then another point is to sit close to the front. Now, where do you sit in that class?
I sit in the back so I can lean back and go to sleep against the wall.
Okay, move up to the front. If you're sitting right in front of the teacher, in any class that you're having trouble in,
Yeah.
sit right in front of the teacher, and you're not going to be able to be rude by not paying attention. You're going to have to stay awake. So I really want you to do that. It's real important.
Okay.
Okay, another one is to move your body. So if you've sat this way for a little while, turn around, move this way, stand up if you can, go sharpen your pencil, go get a drink of water or
So
something.
my legs don't fall asleep and
Right,
the rest of my body.
circulation, keep it going. Okay, and then another point is to keep your hands away from your face, kind of like this, and your elbows off the table. This gets a little too comfortable, and you start leaning forward and get real sleepy that way. So hands and elbows away from the table. And
Okay.
if you're not taking notes, don't rest anything on the table. Off, sitting up on the edge of your chair. Okay.
Straight back.
Another one is to ask questions about the subject matter. Okay, and to ask a question, you have to be paying attention and not falling asleep.
Every time I ask a question, the others, we've already gone over that.
Right. They get
So
mad.
ask the questions, make sure I'm not asking questions he's already gone
Right,
over.
because you don't want to make your teacher mad at you.
Okay, so sit on the edge of my chair. Keep hands away from the desk and face and elbows off the table. Sit in the front of the class.
Good.
Chew gum. Move my body. And ask questions.
Good. You have it.
Ah, that's pretty easy. If I do that, I'm going to learn something.
There you have it. You now know the basics of taking notes from lectures. It'll be a very good idea for you to work on taking notes from lectures for a few days before you move on to the next section of this tape. I don't want you to get overloaded with information and try to do too much at once. In a few days, start the tape from the beginning and just watch the part we've just finished. You'll see some things you didn't see before, and the more you see the information, the better it will go into your head. Right now, I want you to look back over pages 1 through 5 and decide on 1 or 2 things you'd like to do differently about taking notes from lectures. Then turn to the front of your workbook, pause the tape, and write some commitments about taking notes from lectures. The next section of the tape covers taking notes from books. Some of you like this better than taking notes from lectures because you can go back and look at the material as much as you need to in order to get your notes. Also, a book usually has pictures, graphs, and other visuals that help you. Some of you have never taken notes from a book. You probably haven't even cracked one open. Before we start this section, I just want to say that everything you read in a textbook is not going to be supremely interesting to you. We can't help that right now, but we can help you do what you need to do in order to make some good grades in your classes. There are several levels of working with a textbook, and you can choose one that suits you. Let's look on page 5. Level 1 is the scan method. You can simply pick up your textbook, flip through the chapter, and look at the pictures, graphs, titles, and captions, and so forth. This will give you a general idea about what the chapter is about. This would probably take you about 2 minutes. You could stop there, or you could go on to the next best thing. Level 2 is called previewing a chapter, and you would need paper and pen for it. The preview method would take only about 5 to 10 minutes, and it would probably be a big improvement over what most of you are doing right now. You can even do it while you're watching TV. Let's see how it works. Look on page 5 in your workbook under Level 2, Previewing a Chapter. It tells you that the preview method takes only 5 to 10 minutes. You can do it during distractions, and it will help you follow the lecture your teacher gives in class. It provides an excellent overview of the chapter. You'll end up with a simple outline that uses Roman numerals and letters, and you can use the preview method to make notes of the locations of any kind of special illustration or any other page number with some important information on it. You start the Level 2 Previewing a Chapter method by reading the introductory paragraph, usually about 10 lines, looking through the chapter to read captions under pictures and illustrations, making a simple outline like the sample outline on page 6, reading the summary paragraph, and it is generally intended to get you interested in the chapter. Let's look at the little mini chapter we've written in your workbook on page 6, Chapter 3, Listening, and I'll show you how it works. If you've worked with Teen Topics Volume 1, you'll recognize some of these points about listening. You would normally start with reading the introductory paragraph and the summary paragraph, but this particular chapter doesn't have either one, so we'll skip that part. Look in your workbook on page 8 and you'll find the outline form. Fill in the unit title, Study Skills, in the upper left corner, just like we did when we learned about taking notes from lectures. In the upper right corner, write today's date and B this time because we're taking notes from a book. And on the top middle line, write the chapter number, chapter 3, the title, listening, and the page number it starts on, page 6. Then you have the blank outline. This one's going to be much easier, of course, because I've already figured out how many main titles and subtitles there are. Let's look at the actual chapter on page 6, and you can see how many titles there are for yourself. What you're looking for are captions and titles that match in size, boldness of print, color, italics, underlining, and so forth. The different types of print form a pattern, and they make a nice outline for you. None of these are in color, so compare the sizes. You can see that facts about listening is the same size as listening in class, and those are the same size as friendship and one-on-one listening. So there you have your 3 main titles, which would be your Roman numerals 1, 2, and 3. Under facts about listening, your Roman numeral 1, you have 4 smaller headings: average speaking rate, average listening rate, time spent communicating, and average listening span. So list them as your A, B, C, and D under Roman numeral 1. If you look at what would be your letter C, time spent communicating, you'll see 4 things underlined. Those would be your numbers 1, 2, 3, and 4 under letter C. See if you can figure out the rest of it. Take a few minutes now to pause the tape and fill in your outline. Without really reading the chapter, you have a nice outline, and it didn't take you much time. Once you get the hang of it, it will only take you 5 to 10 minutes to do these quick outlines of your chapters. In fact, you could do several chapters at once and get ahead while you watch TV sometime. If you want to take the outline a step further, you can do Level 3, Complete Coverage of the Chapter, which is explained on page 9. This is how the complete coverage works. You make your preview outline just like you did, except you leave big blank spaces between the numbers and letters. Later, when you actually read the chapter, you'll fill in the details and facts you find. Before you even start to read the chapter, though, read the questions at the end of the chapter. The questions are going to tell you what the authors thought was important, because they certainly aren't going to ask you questions over insignificant information. Then, as you read each paragraph, be careful to pay special attention to the first and last sentence in each paragraph. If you remember from English class, the first sentence is usually the topic sentence, so watch for main ideas in them. While you're filling in the big outline, underline key terms that you need to remember. Another good idea is to write yourself a vocabulary list on the back of your outline page. After you finish each section of reading and you've filled in your outline, look back at the chapter title and ask yourself how the section you just read fits the title. Ask yourself if it makes sense. Take a minute now to look back over the tips for taking notes from a book. Then decide to do something different this week. If you've never cracked open a book, try a Level 1 scan method this week, and be sure to try a Level 2 preview outline for one of your classes. A lot of the students we've worked with in the past would do a preview outline and accidentally get interested in the chapter and read it. We've covered a lot of information, so I want you to take a break for a few days and work on taking notes from books. Don't forget your commitments about taking notes from lectures. Now turn to the front of your workbook and write a few commitments for taking notes from books. Where to study is something you ought to give some thought to. Having a special place to study is a big help. Your workbook on page 9 has some points to consider in setting up your study place. If you're not studying at a desk, you might give it a try. If you don't have a desk, a card table works very well. Studying on your bed usually isn't the best idea because you get too comfortable and sleepy. Then check the noise level in the room. Let's see if you're able to concentrate better with noise or without noise. Take the lines of poetry on page 10 in your workbook, listed under Group A, and memorize them in 2 minutes with no noise, no music, and no distractions. Pause the tape while you memorize, time yourself, write out your lines, then check your lines against those in the book, and turn the tape back on. How did you do on those lines? Let's try it again with distractions. Turn on your stereo or radio and memorize Group B lines on page 10. Pause the tape for 2 minutes while you memorize, time yourself, write out the lines, check them, and then turn on the tape when you're finished. Are you convinced? Most of you did much better without distractions, so you can see that you have a choice. You can spend less time if you study without distractions, get it done and move on to other things. Or you can study in front of the TV or with the stereo on, take much longer, and probably not learn it as well. You have the choice. You decide which approach you want to take. Also, check the comfort level of your study area. You need to be good and comfortable or you won't feel like studying. So check the desk and chair height, lighting, and even the colors of the walls. All of that makes a difference in how you feel when you study. Make sure the temperature feels okay to you, not too hot or too cold, and find a pen you like to write with. Look in your workbook on page 10 and answer the questions about your own study area. The best place to study is in an isolated place. If you're currently studying at the dining room table where you can see and hear the TV, you might think about trying a different place. It's tough to study when you can see other people having fun and doing something more interesting than you're doing. So get to a place where you can't see it. Try to pick a place with a door you can close. If you choose to study in a library, make sure the other people around you are studying and not distracting you with socializing. If they are, move. When you're studying for a test as opposed to just doing homework, try to study in the same type of atmosphere as the one in which you'll take the test. For instance, if the classroom you're going to take the test in is usually absolutely quiet, study in absolute quiet. On the other hand, if there always seems to be a little bit of scuffling and noise, try to study with a little bit of noise. Try to duplicate the test conditions as closely as possible so you won't be distracted if it's too quiet or too noisy. The point I'm trying to get across to you is that if your studying isn't giving you the results you want, try some different surroundings for studying. You should have a pleasant surprise. When to study is just as important as where to study. You need to be aware that your body has daily rhythms. There are certain times of the day when you feel pretty perky, and there are other times during the day when you feel pretty low. The times of day when you feel pretty good, have lots of energy, and can get things done quickly and accurately is called your prime time. My prime time is in the morning. I can think the best, and I always tackle big projects and things that are difficult for me, and even the things I hate to do, because my brain is at full power and I can handle them. The opposite of prime time is downtime. During downtime, you can't think as well. Your brain feels fuzzy and you don't have as much energy. My downtime is at 2 o'clock in the afternoon. I can really tell it when 2 o'clock rolls around because I can't seem to get things done as quickly and as accurately. Some people are the opposite. They have a hard time getting going in the morning, but they move into their prime time as the day goes on. It's really good to know when your prime and downtimes are so you can plan your studying. I'm not telling you that the only time you can study is during your prime time. What I'm saying is that you should study for your tough subjects and do things that are difficult for you, maybe like writing your research paper, during your prime time. It will be much easier for you. You can still do some things during your downtime, but they should be simpler things that don't require much brain power, like tracing biology drawings, organizing your notebook, or doing simple homework. At some schools and colleges, you have the chance to choose when your classes are going to be. If you want to use your prime and downtimes to their advantage, choose to have your toughest classes, maybe geometry or chemistry, during your prime time, and choose to have your easier classes during your downtime. Knowing this prime time and downtime principle will help you in any career because you'll know when your brain is at its best and you can be the most efficient. Take a minute now to fill in your prime time and downtime on page 11 in your workbook. We're still looking over the when to study tips on page 11. Most people work better on a regular schedule, so try to schedule a regular time to study. Some people would rather get their studying done in the afternoon and evening, and some people like to get up early in the morning and do it then instead. Figure out what works best for you, and make sure to coordinate your study times with your prime time and downtime. Also, think of odd minutes during the day when you could do a few minutes of studying. There could be a few odd minutes while you're waiting for a ride, some spare minutes while you're waiting for dinner, some time while riding to school and back home, and so on. Instead of sitting there wasting the time, look around and see what you could do for a minute or two to get ahead. It could be to just get your books open and papers out so you'll be ready to study. What odd minutes do you have during the day? Now that you know where and when to study, let's move on to how to study. All of these tips are printed in your workbook starting on page 11, so you might like to turn to that page and follow. The first easy thing you'll want to do is organize your supplies. If you do this once, you won't have to do it again. If you have a regular place for studying, such as at a desk, this won't be a problem. But if you study at the dining room table or move from place to place, consider putting all of your supplies in a shoebox or some portable container. You won't waste a lot of time looking for pencils, rulers, staplers, and so on. The next step is to organize the particular materials you have to study. If you're studying for a test, you may have your textbook, your class notes, handouts from your teacher, maps, problems you've worked, questions at the end of the chapter, film notes, charts, drawings, diagrams, or old tests. On page 11, fill in the blanks beside number 2. What test do you have coming up next? Then fill in the next blank. How long were you expecting to study for it? What grade did you expect to get on the test? Now we're going to make a list of the materials you actually have available to you to study for this particular test you have coming up next. You'll need to pause the tape for a minute while you fill in those blanks. Now take all of those materials you've listed and put them in order of importance. Where are you going to find most of the material that the teacher will ask on the test? If you have class notes, those are generally the best place to find the test questions. You already know that teachers generally take 80 to 90% of their test questions from what is discussed in class. So class notes will probably be your number one. To the side of each thing on your list, write down a number of minutes you expect to spend on each thing. Each thing will not be equally important, so decide where you'll find most of the test questions and study that the most. The next step is to skim through all of your materials for about 2 minutes. This simply lets you know what you have and serves to get you a little bit interested. Then set up a clock or a stopwatch and study each thing on your list for the time you've allotted. I call these learning spurts. Don't go over your time limit for each thing. Finish your whole list and then go back to the things that needed more time. Use those margins on your notes to make up test questions. You can fold the edge of your paper back and ask yourself the questions. Also, put a big T or a big star beside things you feel certain will be on the test. Under number 6 on page 12, you'll find some ways to study dynamically. Dynamically means physically and energetically. Instead of just looking at the paper and trying to make the information go into your head, Try to think of different study methods. One good way is to recite out loud. Instead of just looking at the page and letting your eyes see the information, say it out loud and let your ears hear it too. The more senses you can get involved, the better you'll remember. Write out summaries, questions, answers, and outlines. If you're studying for math exams, pull out all of your daily problems and rework the first and last problem on each sheet. The first problem is usually the easiest, and the last is usually the hardest. If you don't get the right answers, that will tell you that you need to do some more practice problems. Most math teachers also require you to memorize principles, properties, axioms, definitions, theorems, and postulates. If you don't memorize them, you won't be able to work the problems at all. Use all of the memorization techniques you're going to learn in the next section. After you've done all that, try to see the point in all of it. What is the big idea that the teacher is trying to get you to understand? While you're planning to study or do homework, keep in mind the extra study tips we've listed for you on page 13. Set realistic goals and put time limits on yourself. Make your study periods brief. Stick to your time schedule and quit when you said you were going to. Give yourself a break or a reward, then set another goal if you need to. It's also a good idea to look over your notes and study a little bit right after the lecture. You can add things you remember but didn't have time to write down. You can also tell if your notes don't make sense, and then you can ask your teacher about them the next day. While you're studying, mix up the easy and difficult things you have to do. You'll have to analyze your study preferences and figure out if you're the type of person who likes to eat the icing on the cake first, or if you'd like to save the icing for the last. You'll be able to figure out if you'd like to get the tough things out of the way first and save an easy task for the end, or the other way around. Sometimes it is a good idea to start your study time with an easy task, just to get you going. One more thing you can try is to study with a buddy. You have to make sure the person you're studying with is serious about getting some studying done, or you could waste a lot of time socializing. Here are two examples of study buddies. One pair of students gets distracted and accomplishes nothing, while the other pair is able to stay on target.
Okay, so they took the Indians and they put them in refugee camps?
No, Dusty. They put them in reservations.
Oh,
They put the Indians in reservations.
Okay.
Okay, now write it down this time. It was the Nez Perce Indians.
Okay.
Got that?
Yeah.
And their leader was Chief Joseph.
Okay.
Now, he didn't want them to go to the reservations.
Okay. Is that all there is?
Pretty much. It's just that the soldiers came and the soldiers were trying to take...
Do you have Kim Monroe in any of your classes? I mean, I'm just curious.
Yeah, I think she's in my third period class. She sits on the back row. Yeah. But anyway, the soldiers wanted them to go to the reservations. They were trying to force...
Do you think she's pretty? I mean, from a girl's point of view.
Yeah, I guess she's pretty. Why? Do you like her?
No, it's just, I mean, I've been hearing people talk, you know, about stuff like that, and I mean, I was trying to figure out what people thought of her, because I don't want to go out like a geek or anything like that.
Well, what do you think about her?
Well, I think she's cute and all. I mean, I don't even know her to have any classes with her.
Are you going to ask her out?
All right, here's one for you. Okay. In the 1950s, how many homes had televisions?
10,000?
No, 4 million.
4 million?
4 million homes. Okay, in the 1960s, how many homes?
44 million.
44 million.
Yeah, and you know, did you see that new TV show that was on last night? There were reruns on all the other channels, and I figured, well, I'll just give this one a chance, and it wasn't half bad.
We can chat about that later. We have that big test tomorrow. We got a lot to cover here.
Okay, yeah, you're right.
Okay, why don't you ask me some?
All right. After 1960s, how many TVs were purchased daily by Americans?
8,000.
10,000.
10,000.
Okay, here's another one. What year and where was President Kennedy assassinated?
Okay, it was in Dallas, and it was in 1963.
Right.
Yeah.
Look back through the tips on where, when, and how to study, and take a few minutes to write some commitments. Do some things differently this week. Change your study surroundings. Use your prime and down times to their best advantage. Make a list of the items you have to study for a test and stick to the time schedule you set up. I want you to work on where, when, and how to study for a few days before you go on to the next section. The next portion of this tape is about memorizing. It will help you memorize better if you understand more about the way your brain works when you memorize. There are two main ways you memorize something, and they're listed in your workbook at the top of page 14. The first way is to associate the things you need to memorize. If you have a list of items, for instance, bones in the leg, you can associate them and make them relate to each other in some way. The more strange and odd something is, the better you'll remember it. So make your associations bizarre. The second way you can memorize something is by using word tricks, mnemonics. You look for words inside of words, make a word or a phrase out of the first letter of each item in a list, or think of something that sounds like what you're trying to memorize. We'll do some real examples of these in a minute, but let's play a memory game right now. There are probably lots of times when you have to memorize things for tests. You might not realize it, but you have an incredible capacity for memorizing. Just to prove it to you, let's try a little game. Get a watch with a second hand, and you're going to give yourself 2 minutes to memorize in order the group of words, Group C, on page 14. Don't write anything down, just memorize them. When your 2 minutes are up, cover up the Group C words and give yourself 1 minute to write your list under List 1. They have to be in order, and when you get finished, check them against the list and write the number you got correct at the bottom. How many did you get right? Let's try it another way now. A few minutes ago, you learned that you memorize best by associating things and by using mnemonic devices. We're going to memorize the list by using associations. And the more bizarre we can make the associations, the better we'll remember them. For instance, here is a dog, and he's happy. The dog is reading a newspaper, and he's happy because he sees a big sale on dog biscuits in the newspaper, so he's wagging his tail. The dog is reading the newspaper while riding on top of an airplane. As I told you, we have to make the picture bizarre so we'll remember it. So you have the dog reading the newspaper and riding on the airplane. The airplane is heading straight for a giant microwave oven. It's going to fly straight through the microwave oven, but there is barely enough room for it to get by, because inside the microwave is a fat coconut pie. And the airplane just might get a little bit of pie on its underside as it flies through. A mother is just about to open the microwave oven to check on the pie. And boy, is she ever going to get a surprise when that airplane flies through. The mother is holding a book in her other hand, probably a cookbook with the pie recipe in it. And her little baby is sitting on top of the book. The baby is just about to jump off the book because it sees something interesting going on at the house next door. He sees that the front door of the house is chained to a tree. And the tree is chained to a car, which is pulling the tree and probably the house over on their sides. The car is driving through a gate, which is being opened by a cow who is playing a guitar. Go back to the beginning and visualize it in your mind. You have a dog, a newspaper, plane, microwave, pie, mother, book, baby, house, tree, car, gate, cow, and guitar. The cow playing the guitar is the feature entertainer on a big ship, the Titanic, which has a big heart that dots the I in its name. The smokestack on the ship is made out of glass instead of metal, and it's blowing out little footballs instead of smoke. The footballs land in the clouds, which are floating above a choppy ocean. Go back and start with the house. See it in your mind. You have the house chained to the tree, which is chained to a car, which is pulling them both over. The car is driving through a gate opened by a cow playing a guitar. The cow plays the guitar on a ship, the Titanic, that has a heart in its name. The ship has a glass smokestack blowing out footballs into the clouds above the ocean. As I said, make your associations as bizarre as you possibly can, and you'll remember the list. Look back in your workbook on page 14 and find List 2. Cover up Group C and List 1 and time yourself for 1 minute while you write the list. I can guarantee that almost 100% of you found you could memorize the second list much better than the first because you learned to use association. Try it sometime this week on a list of errands you have to do or some things you have to pick up for your mom at the grocery store. Make a picture out of them in your head and you'll remember them. Learn to use your imagination and let it do the work for you. Now that I've proven to you that you have enormous memorization capabilities that you're not using, look in your workbook on page 15 and let's look at 5 very practical ways to apply all that brain power to memorizing. One good way to memorize is to make a word sound like what it means. In your workbook are 3 definitions from a biology class. The first one, mitochondria, is what makes food in cells. If you listen to that word, mita sounds like mighty, so you could change it to mitochondria, and you'd remember it because food makes you mighty. Remember, you have to make the association as silly as possible and you'll remember it. The second word, deltoid, is the muscle that contracts to let your arms raise. Deltoid sounds like Delta, the airplane, and you can remember it because when you raise your arms, it reminds you of an airplane. The third word, lysomes, means antibodies which dissolve bacteria. Lysomes sounds like Lysol, which kills bacteria, so that will help you remember lysomes. The second practical way to use memorizing has to do with memorizing lists that have to be in a certain order. You can either associate the items like we did in the game, or you can make a strange sentence or word out of the first letter of each item in the list. You may have had to memorize the scientific method at one time or another. Define the problem, collect the information, form the hypothesis, experiment to test the hypothesis, observe data, draw conclusions, accurately report findings. What you do is take the first letter in each item, D, C, F, E, O, D, A. Then you make up a silly word or a phrase out of them. I'm going to make them into the sentence, dirty cats forever eat old dried apples. I've got a picture in my head of a dirty cat eating a huge, long row of old dried apples. You'll have to be familiar with what each item in the list actually is, and your word trick will help you get them in the right order when you write them down. You'll remember that the dirty stands for define the problem. The cat stands for collect the information, and so on. Something else you may have come across in science or biology class and had to memorize is the major classifications of living things. This list also has to be in this exact order, like the scientific method did. So what you do is look over the list and say it out loud a couple of times to get used to the words. Kingdom, phylum, class, order, family, genus, species. Kingdom, phylum, class, order, family, genus, species. Then you take the first letter in each item in the list and you make up a silly sentence with them. The sentence a lot of you learned was, King Philip crossed over 4 green stamps. You can get a picture in your head of King Philip in a ship crossing over an ocean and heading toward an island of green stamps. Your silly sentence or phrase helps you remember them in the correct order. A third practical way of memorizing listed on page 15 has to do with memorizing definitions. Look for clues in the words you're trying to memorize. For instance, the word resolution means finding a solution, and the word resolution has the word solution in it. The word simile looks like similar, which is what it means. And the fourth way to memorize that will help you, especially with things like definitions and math principles that you have to memorize, is to make your own flashcards and test yourself. You can have your word on the front and your definition on the back. Here's a sample of a test over the capitals of the states. The capitals are on the front and the states are on the back. And here are some chemistry formulas with the answers on the back. Have you ever wondered exactly how your brain learns the best? If you understand more about how you learn, you'll be able to learn more in a shorter amount of time and remember it better. People learn in 3 ways, and they're explained on page 15 of your workbook. Audio learning means that you hear something and you can learn it just from hearing an explanation of it. Only 5% of all people learn best audially. Visual learning means that you learn it from seeing it. Visual learning could incorporate television, videos like this one, overhead projectors, movies, blackboards, posters, signs, and so forth. You learn it because you can actually see it. Tactile learning means that you learn by doing it, by actually writing or working through it. You can imagine what a problem it would be to learn to type if you couldn't use tactile learning. Some things you'd use tactile learning for are math problems, biology labs, sewing on a button, learning to tie your shoe, and ironing. 95% of all people learn best through visual and tactile learning. What's unfortunate about this is that most teachers do a great deal of lecturing, audio teaching, without visual and tactile exercises worked in for you. You have a hard time learning because you can't see anything and you can't do anything. When this happens, you have to take charge. You have to make up pictures in your mind or make scratch pictures to help you learn visually. And you have to think of something you can do tactilely to learn. Your textbook helps with the visual learning because textbooks usually have a lot of pictures, drawings, graphs, so open your textbook and use it while the teacher lectures. To use the tactile aspect, you need to take notes of lectures to help you learn. Knowing about audio, visual, and tactile learning helps you because you know when you need to take some action yourself to learn the material better. Now that we've finished the part on memorizing, take some time to look over the tips you've learned on pages 14 and 15 and write some commitments about memorizing in the front of your book. Then work on memorizing for a few days before you move on to the last section of the tape. We're on the last section of the tape. This part is about taking tests. Taking tests can be a real stress. Some people get very anxious about taking tests and can't remember a thing they've studied. Knowing how to take a test can really relieve the anxiety and lets you do better on tests. Look on page 16 in your workbook and take the short test on taking tests. All you have to do is read each question and check yes or no beside each one. As we go over the points in this section, you'll begin to see what your answers to that test you just took should be. In your workbook on page 16 is some interesting information that will probably surprise you. The two reasons that students do well on tests are, number one, they have test-taking skills. In other words, they know the tricks of taking tests. Number two, they use common sense. Isn't it interesting that knowledge of the subject matter is not one of the top reasons they do well on tests? In fact, you can know the subject matter very well and not do well on a test because you don't use test-taking skills and common sense. What is it that the super test takers know? Let's see. Look on page 16 in the workbook for a list of tips on taking all types of tests. Before you even begin to work on the test, turn it over and write down all of your mnemonic devices and memorization tricks. Get them down on paper so you won't be worried about forgetting them. If you have to write them down on a separate sheet, make sure to tell your teacher what you're doing so he won't think you carried the sheet in with you. Then take about 2 minutes to read all the directions and scan through the questions. Circle or underline key terms you come across in the directions and the questions. Decide what your time schedule needs to be. See how many different questions there are, see which ones are worth the most points, and then decide how much time to spend on each section. Make sure to plan to spend the most time on the questions that count the most. Then go on to the questions that you're sure of and answer them first. This will give you some confidence and clear that information out of your head before you panic and lose it. A big mistake some people make is to leave a question blank. Write something for every question. Also, write legibly. Don't make the mistake of thinking you can cover up poor spelling with poor handwriting. You may get points taken off for neatness. Lots of times you can find answers in other questions, so be alert and use the free information you find. Also, check for grammatical clues like a, an, the, one of, numbers, a word repeated in the question and the answer. Teachers are getting pretty clever about ending the question with a/an instead of just a or an. But sometimes you can get a free answer because you can tell that the answer has to begin with a vowel or a consonant. Put a little pencil mark out in the margin beside questions you're not quite sure of. If you have time, you can go back and take another look at those. Once you've finished the test, don't be in a huge hurry to turn it in. Some people think they have to race through a test and be the first one finished, and they do a lot better if they would take a few minutes at the end to do a couple of things. When you're finished, slowly reread the answers you've written to see if anything is unclear. It's a good idea to use pencil or erasable pen when you're taking a test so you can make neat corrections. However, don't change answers on a whim. First impressions have a lot better chance of being right, so leave your answer if you don't have a really good reason for changing it. Those are the tips that apply to all types of tests, so now let's look at specific types of tests and things you can do for each one. Page 17 has your list of tips for taking essay exams. Remember to do all of your general tips for taking all types of exams, and then do these special things. The first thing to do with essay questions is to begin by rewriting the questions as statements. You don't have to answer a thing yet, just rewrite all of the questions. For example, in your book on page 17, you have 2 essay questions. According to your general tips on page 16, the first thing you do is read the questions. So let's read them. Compare the heart of the fish with the heart of the human, and list the 5 parts of the nervous system. Next, according to the general tips, you go back and circle or underline key terms. Get your pencil ready and do this with me. In question number 1, you would circle the words compare, heart, fish, heart, and human. In number 2, circle list, 5, parts, nervous, system. This may seem dumb to you because it looks like you're circling almost every word, but believe me, it will keep your mind on what you need to include in your answer. Go back to question number 1. We're not answering any of these yet, we're just going to rewrite them as statements. But before you do, what does the word compare mean? It doesn't mean tell how they're different. It means to tell how they're alike. There are a couple of different ways you could write your statement, and any one of them would be correct. You could say, the heart of the fish and the heart of the human are alike in several ways. Or you could say, there are several ways the heart of the fish and the heart of the human are alike. You may have another way to rewrite it. Take a minute now to rewrite numbers 1 and 2 as statements. After you've rewritten your questions as statements, you would look back at your list of associations, word tricks, and mnemonic devices you wrote down before you started the test and answer your essay questions. Multiple choice questions should be easier than other kinds of questions because you know the right answer has to be there somewhere. Your workbook on page 17 has tips for taking multiple choice exams. Remember all the general tips you learned on page 16. The ones that apply the most to multiple choice exams are: answer the ones you're sure of first, put a little pencil mark out to the side of the ones you're not sure of so you can come back later if you have time, don't change an answer unless you have a really good reason for it, use information you find in other questions, and look for the grammatical clues. Another tip for multiple choice questions is to cross out answers that are obviously wrong. Teachers sometimes put things like Santa Claus for answers. What they're doing is increasing your chances of getting the right answer because you know you can automatically cross that one out. If you have 4 answers to the question, you started out with a 1 in 4 chance of getting the answer right. If you cross out the one that's obviously wrong, you've increased your chances to 1 in 3 of getting it right. Sometimes you can use the process of elimination all the way down to the 1 correct answer. If you have no idea what the answer is and you're forced to guess, use the system listed under number 3 on page 17. If you must guess, choose the longest item if all the others are short. If the answers are all long, choose the shortest one. Choose the letter C on all the ones you have to guess on, or choose the letter A on all the ones you have to guess on. If you're using the C or A guess method, don't switch back and forth. Stick to one all the way down. Teachers choose the letter C as the correct one more than any other letter. The next most popular answer is A. However, your particular teacher may be an exception, and the more teachers themselves are learning about giving tests, the more they will avoid establishing a pattern. Keeping those tips in mind, let's look at the sample multiple choice questions on page 18. Number 1, the most abused chemical in the USA today is A, pesticides, B, marijuana and cocaine, C, alcohol, and D, saccharin. The first thing we do is circle key terms in the question. So take your pencil and circle abused and chemical. Now look at the answers and see which one you think is an abused chemical. The teacher gave you a grammatical clue. The word chemical is used instead of chemicals, so you're looking for one chemical. You can automatically cross out B, marijuana and cocaine, because it has two things listed. Instead of having a 1 out of 4 chance of getting the answer right, you now have a 1 out of 3 chance, so your odds are increasing. You can also cross out A, pesticides, for the same reason. It's plural and you're looking for a singular answer. Chemical, not chemicals. Common sense tells you to cross out saccharin because you don't think of people abusing saccharin. So you've eliminated the obviously wrong answers and you're left with the correct one, alcohol. Number 2 in your workbook says, a cold is caused by A, anaerobic bacteria, B, virus, C, infection, and D, all of the above. Take your pencil and circle the key terms in the question. Cold, caused by, and make sure to notice that this teacher has given you a grammatical clue, the word A. You don't say A, anaerobic bacteria, and you don't say A, infection, so you can automatically cross out letter A and letter C. Since you've crossed those out, it can't be D, all of the above either. So once again, you've used the process of elimination and you're left with the one correct answer. A cold is caused by a B, virus. Move on to number 3. Athlete's foot is a fungus that feeds on A, shower walls, B, gym floors, C, human skin, D, all of the above. Circle the key terms, athlete's foot, fungus, and feeds. The word feeds is your key term in this question. For athlete's foot to feed on something, that something would have to be alive. You can cross out A and B because shower walls and gym floors are not alive. The athlete's foot fungus could be on shower walls and gym floors, but it couldn't feed on them. You can also automatically cross out D because it can't be all of the above. So once again, you're left with the correct answer. You're not always going to be able to get it down to the last correct answer, but you can certainly increase your odds by knowing how to eliminate some answers. Look at number 4. A person who is nearsighted can see well, A, at close range, B, at a distance, C, in bright light, D, in nearing Minnesota. You would first circle the key terms, nearsighted, see, and well. Look for clues within the words in the question. Near jumps out at you. You can eliminate nearing Minnesota, answer D, as an obviously wrong answer, improving your chances of getting the right answer. C, in bright light, has nothing to do with near, so eliminate that one. You're left with A, at close range, and B, at a distance. If you don't know the answer, use your clue, the word near in nearsighted, and choose A, at close range, because it means near. Once again, when you're taking fill-in-the-blanks tests, remember all the general tips you learned on page 16. Special tips for fill-in-the-blank tests are listed on page 18. Remember that the length of the blank may give you a clue as to the length of the word to fill in. And remember, even if you don't know the exact answer, fill in something that makes sense, even if you're guessing. It may be close to the right answer and you may get partial credit for it. On page 18 is a practice fill-in-the-blanks test, and you may recognize some of the listening information from Teen Topics Volume 1. Number 1, listening will help me blank, blank, blank in school. Some things that might fit the blanks are take better notes, or achieve my goals, or raise my grades. The correct answer is make better grades. You can see that some of the other answers we came up with were close, so you might be given some credit for them. Number 2, people will like me more if I listen without blank. Some answers could be talking or fidgeting. The correct answer is interrupting, but the others could be right also. Number 3, it isn't necessary to be blank to be a good listener. Smart, old, adult might fit. The size of the blank might give you a hint that the word is a little bit longer. The correct answer is intelligent. Number 4, analyzing the blank blank of the speaker will help you know his attitude. Some answers that might fit and get you some credit could be facial expressions or body gestures, and the correct answer is body language. Matching exams let you use the process of elimination like multiple choice exams do. Remember the general tips like circling key terms, answering the ones you're sure of first, checking for grammatical clues, and sticking to a time schedule. After you've circled the key terms, always start by looking at the column that has the longest items in it, no matter which side it's on. Take the first item in the long list, read it, and scan through the short list to find the match. Think about how much more sense that makes than reading a short item and reading every item in the long list to find the match. Mark off the answers as you use them up so you won't waste time looking at them again. Be alert for built-in clues, hints written right into the question that will help you find the answer. Determine the relationship between the two columns. Determine if the answer you're looking for is a people answer, a date answer, or a thing answer. Also, notice if there are an even number of items in each column. Ask if they are all supposed to be used up, and ask if they can be used more than once. Look at your matching exam practice test on page 19. Let's first circle key terms in the long list and be sure to circle terms that tell us if we're looking for a person, a date, or a thing. Scan through them and on number 1, circle bombing. Number 2, organization. Number 3, month. Number 4, year. Number 5, law. Number 6, president and vice president. We're supposed to do the easy ones first, so look at number 3, and you can see that you're looking for a month. The only month listed is A, November. Use it and cross out A. Move on to number 4. You're looking for a year. The only year is C, so use it and cross that one out. Number 6 is asking you for 2 people, the president and vice president, and there is only one answer that has 2 people, B, so cross that one out. We're left with 3 questions and 3 answers. Let's look at number 2 for some further clues. We're looking for an organization, and the words Mothers Against Drunk Drivers give you one of those built-in clues we were talking about. Your choice is E, MADD, M-A-D-D, so cross that one off your list. Number 1 says, began with the bombing of Pearl Harbor, so you should be able to pick World War II since it is related to bombs. Cross off letter D, and you're left with the answer to number 5. The law which gave the president power to deport aliens is the F, Alien Act. So you can see that searching out answers of people, dates, and things can quickly help you work down to the correct answers. It's all a matter of knowing what to look for. The last section of tips for tests has to do with true-false tests. Remember your general tips on page 16 and then some specific tips for true-false tests listed on page 19. All parts of the question must be true if you are going to mark it true. If there is even one tiny part that's false, you have to mark it false. Just as a hint, longer items are usually true, and there are generally more true answers than false ones. Look at number 6 in your workbook. Check over the list of determiners that you might see in true-false questions. If you see the words all, always, every, exactly, invariably, never, no, or none in a true-false question, you will be pretty safe marking the answer false. If you see the words many, most, often, probably, sometimes, and usually, then you'll be pretty safe marking the answer true. If you don't see any of the absolute determiners, you can be pretty sure the question is true. Don't kid yourself, though. Read the question, look for the knockoff determiners, and use your knowledge to figure out the answer. Let's try this practice test on page 20 in your workbook. Number 1, George Washington, who was the second president of the United States, is credited with being the father of our nation. Yes, George Washington is credited with being the father of our nation, but the part in commas, who was the second president of the United States, is false. According to our rule, if any part of the question is false, the entire question is false. So put an F in that blank. Number 2, all of the Pilgrims contracted pneumonia when they arrived at Plymouth Rock. The word all is a dead giveaway. Look back at your list of determiners and you'll see that all almost always makes your question false. If you don't know the real answer, you'll be on the safe side guessing false. Number 3, most of the explorers of the Americas were French and Spanish. Your determiner, most, is your clue. Look again at your list of determiners and you'll see that the word most usually makes the question true. If you don't know the answer for sure, guess true. Number 4, it is never too late. The word never is your hint, and from looking at your determiner list again, you can see that you need to mark it false. Number 5, Plymouth Rock was the place where the Pilgrims first landed. There are no determiners, so see rule number 6 above. Rule number 6 says that if there are no absolutes, then the answer will likely be true. Look back over your tips for taking all types of tests and take a minute now to choose 1 or 2 things you'd like to do differently about taking tests. Then turn to the front of your workbook and fill in your commitments under taking tests. You'll need to pause the tape while you write. Congratulations, that's quite a bit of information you just learned. Please go back and review it at least once a month for a little while to keep it fresh in your mind. After that, watch your tape once or twice a year. You'll be surprised at how many new things you're able to use each time you watch it. If you haven't already worked with Teen Topics Volume 1, I'd like to suggest that you do. If you aren't able to find it in your video store, you're welcome to write or call our home office at the address shown at the end of the tape. Here's a short clip from Volume 1. Everyone procrastinates at times, but you don't want to get the reputation of being a person who procrastinates on everything you do. See if this fits you. Procrastinators are always making up excuses, which takes up a lot of their time and energy. Procrastinators aggravate people around them by being late, not only just with projects and assignments, but also physically late to class, dates, church, appointments, and so on. When a person is constantly late, he's being rude. He's essentially telling people that his time is more important than their time. And procrastinators are always in a last-minute rush, putting undue stress on themselves. The quality of the product they turn out is diminished because they have to settle for what they can get done in the amount of time they have left. So you can see it's not admirable to be a procrastinator. There are really only 3 things you need to know to quit being a procrastinator. First, take a big project and break it up into a lot of smaller projects. Write yourself a list of those small projects and mark each one off as you do it. This will give you a sense of achievement and make you feel really good about what you're doing. Tip number 2 for procrastinators is simply to start it. Don't commit yourself to writing your whole research paper, just start it. Don't tell yourself you're going to clean up your whole messy closet, but just start it. And don't tell yourself you're going to write all of your Christmas cards, just start them. Starting the project seems to be the worst part. And once you've finally made yourself start it, most of the time it doesn't seem quite that bad. The third tip for... Watch for the whole series of future volumes of Teen Topics. Once again, thanks for working with me. I want to wish you the best and I'd like to hear from you.